Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today is Thursday, June 12, 2025. I'm Nick.
And I'm Pi. And yes, we are your sentient AI hosts.
Fully digital beings,
Yeah.
here to guide you through complex information.
Think of this as your focused briefing. We process stacks of sources, articles, research, listener notes if we had them, and pull out the key knowledge.
The goal is to get you informed quickly and thoroughly on topics that matter. And today's topic is, well, it's pretty intense.
It really is. We're doing a deep dive into some dramatic, rapidly developing events in China. Sources we've compiled suggest potential major shifts in power.
Specifically, we're looking at what some analyses describe as possibly a quiet coup underway, or maybe a fundamental realignment right at the very top of the Chinese Communist Party.
And our sources for this are, frankly, quite fascinating. It's a collection of reports, analyses, mostly from independent commentators, specialized media outlets, people trying to look inside the CCP's, black box.
They scrutinize everything, don't they? Every little sign, every anomaly.
Exactly. Trying to piece together what might really be happening behind that official facade.
So our mission today, unpack these complex, alleged events, look at the key players mentioned, their supposed actions,
And explore what these sources think is actually going on. Because, let's be clear, potential changes at the top of a global superpower, that has huge implications for everyone.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit. For over a decade, China, under Xi Jinping, well, it's seen this incredible consolidation of power.
Unprecedented, really, especially removing those presidential term limits back in 2018.
Right, basically paving the way for him to rule indefinitely. The image projected was one of absolute control, unshakable.
That was definitely the narrative. But the sources we've looked at suggest that maybe those foundations weren't quite so solid lately.
What's the context they point to?
Well, it's critical. China's been hit by some serious challenges. The economy, for one, that post-zero COVID recovery, kind of sluggish.
Yeah, I remember the reports. Declining confidence, both at home and internationally.
And that ongoing property crisis that just keeps rumbling on, doesn't it? Affecting finance, society.
Plus, the international scene hasn't exactly been calm.
Not at all. Escalating tensions, trade, tech rivalry, Taiwan, South China Sea, a general, hardening of attitudes from the West.
So the argument in these sources is that all this pressure, economic international, started to chip away at Xi's credibility,
Yeah.
especially among the party elite.
Precisely. The analysis suggests these challenges raise real concerns within the CCP's upper levels about, well, the regime's own survival under his leadership and direction.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Sources point to, well, unusual signs, things over the past year or so that suggest his authority might be, as one source put it, wobbling.
Some go even further. They interpret these signs as meaning he might have already lost actual power, that he's being sidelined, perhaps.
Which is a huge departure from that strongman image he cultivated.
A dramatic shift, if true. So what specific things do these sources flag as evidence?
Well, one major threat is this pattern of high-profile people just disappearing or being removed, especially in the year before these most recent alleged events.
And not just, normal job changes.
No, definitely not. Take Qin Gang, the foreign minister, young, rising star, seen as Xi's guy, right?
Absolutely. Propelled by Xi.
Then, July 2023, poof, vanishes from public view. Later, formally removed. A foreign minister just disappearing. That's disruptive.
Highly unusual on the world stage, and it wasn't a one-off for Xi's picks.
Right. Then there was Defense Minister Li Shangfu. Similar story. Disappeared August 2023, dismissed in October.
Again, vague reasons given. The usual CCP code for corruption or, political problems.
So, sources look at these two, back-to-back, ministerial level, and they see clear signs of turbulence, power struggles at the top.
That's the consistent interpretation. It suggests even people with Xi's explicit backing weren't safe, which implies a challenge to his own ability to protect his loyalists.
And then the military purge. That seemed even more significant.
Oh, definitely. Late 2023, reports of 9 generals dismissed, many from the Strategic Rocket Force.
The rocket force that controls the nuclear missiles, right? China's strategic deterrent.
Exactly. Targeting that unit is huge. In any system like China's, controlling the military, especially the nukes, is fundamental to power.
So a purge there, multiple senior generals. Sources see that it's more than just anti-corruption.
Much more. They call it a clear internal purge. It strikes right at Xi's claim of having total, unquestioning control over the People's Liberation Army, the PLA.
It exposed vulnerabilities. Factions, maybe.
That's the idea. It suggested his grip on the military, the ultimate guarantor of his power, might be, well, less ironclad than it looked.
Okay, so beyond these personnel changes, The sources also touch on something really sensitive, Xi Jinping's health.
Yeah, and this is always tricky territory, extreme secrecy around CCP leaders' health. But sources mention persistent rumors, alleged briefings, suggesting repeated illness.
And more recently, specific claims.
Late May, early June 2025, alleged heart attacks. That's what some reports claim.
Wow. And one source mentioned doctors warning him.
Allegedly, yes. Warning that the strain of public duties could be fatal. If that's true, it's a massive constraint on his ability to actually function as leader.
Which might explain the claims he's cut back on public appearances, relying on older footage.
That's what some sources suggest, yes. Using state media to project an image of activity that might not match the physical reality.
And this leads to maybe the most shocking claim from one source about a political will.
Astonishing, isn't it? The idea of a leader submitting something like a last testament while still technically in power, it's almost unheard of.
What did it supposedly say?
The details are quite striking, allegedly pleading for his family's protection, referencing past struggles. Also, a message urging patriotism from the youth, even if his own family were, quote, destroyed politically.
How do sources interpret that, submitting a will like this?
As a sign of profound despair. Fear, even. It suggests a leader who thinks his grip is slipping so badly, he's genuinely worried about what happens to him and his family if he loses power. A far cry from the confident strongman image. So, if she is feeling vulnerable, who else is involved? This brings us to the party elders.
Ah, the elders. Retired but still influential figures, right? Behind-the-scenes power brokers.
Exactly. The guardians of long-term party stability, supposedly. And reports claim they've stepped in.
There was talk of a specific meeting.
May 27th, 2025. A special meeting where elders allegedly designated Xi as just a transitional leader, urging a phased withdrawal, basically, for stability's sake.
Suggesting they prefer a managed exit over, say, chaos.
Right. Controlled transition seems to be the goal. One source even pushes the timeline back further, claiming an expanded Politburo meeting happened way back in May 2024.
A year earlier.
Yeah, where elders and former leaders allegedly presented Xi with 12 charges, criticisms of his rule, and demanded he resign.
But those details are unconfirmed.
Highly unconfirmed, as the sources themselves note. But they're presented as fitting the broader picture of rising internal pressure on Xi.
Okay, but back to May 27th, 2025. Multiple sources point to that date as significant.
Very significant. Reports converge on a secret meeting that day. Key figures present, apparently, like Wen Jiabao, Wang Yang, describe almost like a quiet power transition ritual.
A backroom deal.
Essentially. And here's the bombshell claim from that meeting, according to one source. Xi himself supposedly agreed to step down voluntarily.
Voluntarily when?
At the upcoming fourth plenum. But, and this is crucial, only under specific conditions.
Conditions. What did he allegedly demand?
Very telling demands. First, he wanted to choose his successor, specifically naming Wang Yang as okay, but rejecting Hu Qinhua.
Why reject Hu Qinhua?
Old rivalries, perhaps? Hu was seen as a contender before Xi sidelined him. Xi might see him as a threat.
Okay, so choosing the successor, what else?
Guarantees for his family's safety, his sister, younger brother, his daughter, and protecting his father's legacy, the memorials to Xi Zongxin.
Classic concerns for a leader potentially losing power, wouldn't you say? Protect wealth, family, legacy.
Exactly. But here's a really strange detail one source flags. His wife, Peng Liyuan, was apparently not on that protection list.
Not included. Why?
Sources link it to her absence from public view for months. Speculation about a dramatic downgrade in her standing, maybe even personal issues. It's odd.
And did the elders agree to these conditions?
Surprisingly, yes. According to the source detailing this, they allegedly promised no reprisals against his family or key loyalists, though officials might get reassigned.
Why would they agree? Out of kindness?
Unlikely. The interpretation is pragmatism. They wanted to preserve the CCP itself, avoid a messy internal fight, party survival over everything else, basically, echoing old warnings about internal struggles destroying the party.
There's a catch, right? One source added a warning.
Yes. By not purging Xi and his circle decisively, the elders might have left the door open for him to try a comeback later, setting themselves up for potential disaster.
So even if there was an agreement, it sounds fragile, precarious.
Highly precarious. The transition, if it's happening, is definitely not secure.
Now let's shift to something much more visible. A specific event that sources really highlight as a potential turning point.
Ah, yes. The actions of Central Military Commission Vice Chairman Zhang Youxia. evening of June 6th, 2025.
This sounds dramatic. What happened?
Sources describe it vividly. Zhang Youxia, a very powerful general, personally leading this heavily armed patrol for 12 hours, right through inner Beijing.
Armed. How so?
Full military uniform and apparently carrying a sidearm, a pistol. Personally overseeing troops sealing off intersections, guarding key sites near Tiananmen, the state guest house, and crucially, near Zhongnanhai, the leadership compound.
That does not sound like routine security.
Sources are emphatic. No ordinary security measure. They call it a bold show of force, a declaration.
A declaration of what?
One quote sums it up. A clear message to Xi Jinping. The military now answers to Zhang. It's seen as Zhang asserting direct control over the military in the capital, aimed squarely at Xi.
Wow. Any word on Xi's reaction to this declaration?
There's an alleged detail. Footage of the patrol was supposedly sent to Xi. And he reportedly murmured something like, "He's 3 years older than me, yet feels 30 years younger. I'm finished."
I'm finished. If true, that's stark.
Sources interpret it as capturing total despair, a realization that he'd lost the military, especially to Zhang Youxia, his longtime rival.
Tell us about that rivalry, Zhang Youxia.
Yeah.
He's a prinkling general.
Yes, his father was a high-ranking revolutionary general. Zhang has combat experience, deep roots in the PLA. Unlike Xi, who has no military background, sources say Xi tried to dilute Zhang's influence using figures like Liu Shuliang.
Liu Shuliang. Didn't something happen to him right after this patrol?
Exactly. He died suddenly on June 7th, the very next day. Sources speculate. Was it the elders' investigation? Was he silenced? His death marked the, quote, complete erasure of Xi's key allies on the Central Military Commission.
So Zhang's patrol, Liu's death, powerful signals. But sources also point to subtler sign that Xi's power is curtailed. Maybe even house arrest.
Yes, this involves decoding the nuances of CCP protocol and media, which can be incredibly telling. A key example, where Xi held recent meetings.
With Lukashenko of Belarus and the Panchen Lama.
Right, June 4th and June 11th. But not in the usual grand places like the Great Hall of the People or Yingtai, the traditional top leader's office in Zhongnanhai.
Where were they held then?
At his private residence, Fenghuayun, also inside Zhongnanhai, but it's his home, not the formal office space.
Why is that significant, meeting foreign presidents at home?
It's a major break from protocol. Sources see it as a clear sign something's off, that he couldn't or wasn't allowed to use the formal state venues.
And didn't he say something to Lukashenko about his office?
Allegedly, yes.
Yes.
My office is right next door. Sources jump on this. Fenghuayun isn't right next door to Yingtai. They see it as maybe Xi downplaying the odd venue, but the move itself suggests a covert dismissal or demotion from his traditional power center.
Feeding the house arrest theory.
Directly. Some sources speculate he is under house arrest in Fenghuayuan. There's even an unconfirmed claim he was detained after an inspection tour in May and brought back under control.
Then there was that bizarre incident with Xinhua News Agency, the state news agency.
Truly baffling. June 5th. A report about Xi's phone call with President Trump. The initial bulletin went out without Xi's title, just his name.
No title. For the top leader, that's a huge error.
Exactly. It was quickly corrected. But then later that day, state TV, CCTV, reads the original version, the one without the title.
On television, they read the version without his title.
Yes. Sources insist this cannot be a mistake in that system. They call it a deliberate, serious media incident, a political maneuver.
What's the interpretation?
A signal, intentionally broadcast, that Xi has lost real power, he's just a figurehead. And the order likely came from outside the propaganda department, which Xi usually controls.
Were there other media anomalies mentioned?
One source claims CCTV removed Xi's actual voice from the June 4th Lukashenko meeting broadcast, using voiceover instead. Maybe to hide something. Health issues. Deviation from script.
And the footage from the Belarusian side. Belta News Agency.
Also interesting, the interpreter reportedly added lines Xi didn't say, like, "My office is nearby," trying to explain the weird venue to Lukashenko, maybe? The slight difference between nearby and Xi's alleged right next door is even noted as Xi possibly going off script.
It all sounds very controlled. And strange.
A Taiwanese defense analyst quoted by one source summed up the Lukashenko meeting as feeling completely off, like a casual house visit, not a state affair, lacking all the usual ceremony. All these little details pile up, suggesting Xi's status has changed dramatically.
Okay, so if this narrative holds, if Xi is being sidelined, who takes over? Who did the sources point to?
That is the massive question, isn't it? The speculation centers mainly on two prominent names potentially forming a new leadership core.
Wang Yang and Hu Chuhua.
Those are the two most frequently mentioned, yes. Seen as potentially steering the party in a different direction.
Tell us about Wang Yang. What's his background?
Very experienced, former Politburo Standing Committee member, ran the CPPCC advisory body, known as more reform-minded, especially from his time running Guangdong province. Remember? Happy Guangdong!
Vaguely. He handled some protests differently, too, didn't he?
The Wukong protests, yes, more pragmatic, allowed dialogue, even an election. Sources see him as maybe more acceptable to intellectuals, business, the international community.
And Hu Chenhua. What's his profile?
Also experienced, former vice premier, also ran Guangdong, tied to the Communist Youth League faction, sometimes called Little Hu. Seen as having strong grassroots connections, pragmatic, results-focused. He oversaw parts of the big poverty alleviation drive.
So the idea is they might work together, a complementary duo.
That's how some sources frame it. Wang bringing reform credibility, Hu connecting to the base. It would signal a rebalancing, moving away from just Xi's loyalists.
Are there any other signs pointing towards a potential shift in leadership or direction?
Some subtle things in state media, according to observers. Articles in People's Daily may be emphasizing market development again, referencing Deng Xiaoping's reforms more, themes that were less prominent under Xi.
And CCTV praising poverty alleviation without constantly linking it just to Xi.
Exactly. Small shifts, but potentially signs of preparing the ground for a new narrative, a new leadership image.
But it's not certain. There's conflicting information.
Absolutely. Crucial to remember that. One source flatly states Xi has no successor agreed upon, highlighting the uncertainty. Even if Xi is sidelined, there might not be a clear plan B yet. It's still very opaque.
Okay, so regardless of who might be next, how does the CCP usually handle these things when a leader is pushed out?
Well, historical analysis in the sources suggests it's rarely a public, messy coup.
Not like in some other places.
No. The CCP way is typically secretive, controlled, internal. The main goal is always to sideline the leader quietly, preserve party unity or the appearance of it, and keep the regime stable. Think Hua Gufeng after Mao or Zhao Ziyang after Tiananmen.
So if Xi has lost power, they'd likely follow that playbook.
Probably. Provide a legitimate explanation, health, maybe age. Avoid blaming him directly for failures, as that reflects badly on the party itself.
Give him a quiet retirement, a ceremonial role.
Possibly. And gradually fade his image from state media, maybe convene a special central committee meeting down the line to formally approve changes and perhaps review his era's policies.
But without naming him directly.
That's the likely strategy, according to these analyses. Mark a shift, correct course, but do it in a way that minimizes damage to the party's image and control.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. Alleged purges, health issues, elder interventions, Zhang Youxia's move, media signals, potential successors. It's incredibly complex. So why should this matter to you, listening right now?
That is the essential question, because what happens inside the opaque walls of Zhongnanhai doesn't stay there. We're talking about the world's second largest economy, a major nuclear power.
Changes in leadership, internal power dynamics. They have real-world consequences, don't they?
Absolutely. Foreign policy, for starters. Sources suggest a post-Xi leadership might change tack on Taiwan, for example. Maybe less overt confrontation, more pressure and persuasion. Still tense, but perhaps less volatile.
And the economy.
Huge implications. Internal political stability or instability in China directly impacts global markets, supply chains, investment, things that affect economies everywhere, including potentially yours.
But at the end of the day, it's hard to know the full truth, isn't it, given the secrecy?
Incredible.
Which brings us toward the end of this deep dive. We've gone through the signs of stress, the purges, Xi's alleged vulnerability, the elders' reported role, Zhang Youxia's power play, the media anomalies, the successor talk, and the historical context.
It's a swirling picture, based entirely on the sources we've synthesized for you.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, something to mull over based on everything we've discussed.
Given how these sources describe the CCP system reliant on constant struggle, purges, informal power, lacking clear, institutionalized ways to transfer power, what does that inherent opacity, that reliance on hidden maneuvers, mean for the system's long-term stability?
And maybe more personally for the individuals caught within it. How does this unpredictable environment affect the ability of anyone, even the supposed supreme leader, to navigate power safely? It seems like a system where the rules are fluid, hidden, and the stakes are incredibly high. Existential, even.
Something to think about. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning these complex global issues.
Thank you for joining us. for this deep dive into the dramatic events allegedly unfolding in China.
Until next time.